Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning with our Trellis Strategies 360 discussion. We are excited to have you. Everyone's trickling in. If you would like to share where you're tuning in from in the chat, that would be fun to see where everybody's tuning in from. My name is Andrea Gonzalez. I work with Trellis Strategies, and we are so excited to have our 360 discussion series this morning. It's part of our current series on barriers to completion, why individuals pause their education. I'm going to wait about another minute because the numbers are still trickling in. But again, if you would like to share where you're tuning in from in the chat, that would be fun. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so today's topic is who doesn't start post-secondary education and why? And I'm very excited to have everyone here this morning. I do want to say that we will be answering questions at the end of this throughout the discussion. If you have questions you want to get off your mind, you can chat me or you can type it in the Q&A, and I will ask those of the panelists at the end of the moderated discussion that Dr. Chromy is going to host. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Chromy.
Thank you, Andrea. And a big thank you to Andrea. She has been the power behind all of these webinar series and has been putting people together and getting the right panelists together. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Trellis 360 webinar for January. My name is Debra Chromy. I am President and CEO here at Trellis Strategies. We're based in Round Rock, Texas. And I'm so pleased to see that so many of you have joined us for today's discussion. It's going to be a good one. Well, they're actually all good. For those of you who this is your first time, the Trellis 360 series was started early in 2023 to bring together industry leaders for thought-provoking discussions on today's higher education issues and workforce landscape. Our first series focused on the value of post-secondary education and was so well received that we started our second series in the fall, as Andrea mentioned, entitled Barriers to Completion. Our goal with all of these sessions is that participants gain invaluable insights, share in the discussion, and network with like-minded professionals. So to the extent that you're able to share information, as Andrea mentioned in the chat, it allows people to connect with each other. Also, really encourage you to, as Andrea mentioned, put questions or comments in the chat because we do want to open this up and make it interactive. So I'm excited to start this fourth session of our series on barriers to completion. And this one is focused on those who don't start post-secondary education programs and why. And I'm excited that we have two really great panelists today. The first is Arati Singh. She's president of the Austin Independent School District School Board. Arati has been a program evaluator of the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Department of Education grants focusing on STEM pathways, workforce development, and college access. Arati is also the mom of an Austin Independent School District graduate and a current student. So welcome, Arati. Very happy to have you with us this morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. Our second panelist is Jeffrey West Rodriguez, but he goes by Jeff. Jeff is the Executive Director of Education and Employment Partners, working to bring people, information, and resources together to increase educational and job attainment in the Coastal Bend region of South Texas. For those of you who are maybe from outside Texas, the Coastal Bend region is a bit more rural than the Austin area. I'll just say that. So we have somebody representing an urban area and a rural area. Jeff has a passion for education attainment as a means for lifelong prosperity. As Andrea mentioned, I will engage in a discussion with our two panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions from all of you. So let's jump in and get started. And I would like to start off with asking both Arati, and I'll start with Arati, as well as Jeff, to talk just for a few minutes about their work and why they do what they do and why they're so passionate about that work.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for inviting me to be here. It's really an honor. I see lots of friends in the chat, in the participant list. So hello, everyone. I started my career as a bilingual fourth grade teacher in Donna, Texas. And I have really just been that was a wonderful way to start my career in education. There's nothing like being a teacher. So all the folks here who have started their careers off as teachers or are teachers, hats off to you. And really, since then, over the past 20 to 30 years, I have been continuing my work in education as a program evaluator, as you mentioned. And what I really like about that work is you get to look at the whole system to get our kids where we want them to be. And I bring that perspective to my work on the board. It doesn't hurt to work a lot with really smart scientists because it allows you to sort of see like 2 or 3 steps down the road what kind of workforce our kids are going to be entering. So we try to bring that innovation into the work we do as a school board. Truly an honor. And I will say as a mom, I started really my journey into volunteering for the district and becoming a school board president through the PTA at my kiddo's school and really bringing an equity focus there. And the specific issue that got me going was I noticed in my professional work, there's a huge disparity between kids who ended up pursuing post-secondary and those who didn't, and realizing that we've got to get parents engaged early on at the elementary school level to be thinking about this. And that's kind of like the nugget that really inspired my work that brought me here to the school board today. So thank you for having me.
That's great. Thanks, Arati. And I'll turn it to Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Chromy. Thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here today. I work for a nonprofit organization. E2E Partners has been in the Coastal Bend region for about 14 years. I've been privileged enough to lead the organization for the last 3 years, and I've been with the organization 5 years total. But I was in the private sector for 15 years before I got into the nonprofit world. And, I can just tell you that to summarize why I do what I do is that I want to be a part of building a better future for our kids. I'm a parent, a father of 4 children. I've got a 17, 16, 15-year-old, all boys, and a 23-year-old daughter. And when I look at them, I see generations. I see the ability that they have to do whatever they want to do if they put their minds to it, and if they have the resources and support necessary to the guidance necessary to achieve their goals. And I think for me, that's why we do what we do. E2E is, as I said, a nonprofit organization. We work in educational attainment. We do adults, some college, no degree. We do college and career readiness for high school students. We do conferences. We do collective impact work and bringing stakeholders together. And I think the alignment in our region is important because there's so many individual organizations doing things in silos. And for a student, from a student perspective, from a learner perspective, that's really defeating. It's hard to create a seamless pathway for a learner, whether it be a high school student direct to college or whether it be an adult learner. It's hard to create a seamless pathway when institutions and organizations and wraparound support service agencies are all working kind of in a silo and on their own. And so our goal, our mission for E2E or for Education to Employment Partners is to really bring that together and then try to create more seamless pathways for learners. So why do I do what I do? It's because I think the future is limitless. I think if we can get partners and stakeholders aligned together for the sake of students and student experiences and student outcomes, then the future will be brighter and the world will be a better place. Generations will be changed. Underserved families and rural area residents will have opportunities that they didn't have before. And so that's why, in a nutshell, that's why I do what I do.
Thanks, Jeff. And for those of you who know Trellis well, as you listen to Jeff talk, you would say, hey, that sounds an awful lot like the vision and mission of Trellis. And indeed, Jeff and E2E Partners has been a recipient for 4 years of a Trellis Foundation grant, or 5?
Yes, we just finished up 5 years, two separate grants. The Adults, Some College, No Degree, Recapture Your Dream program, and also the Upskilling, Reskilling Collaborative that was just concluded this past year.
Yes, so great, and really glad to have you as part of our broader family. I want to turn back to Arati, and Arati, a conversation we were having yesterday in regards to this whole journey, if you will, for a student to post-secondary ed. And we were talking about the fact that it really starts way back when they're, kindergarten or, in the early K-12 space. Do you want to talk a little bit about, your perspective on that issue?
Certainly. One of the things that really made me love our school district and even consider running for school board was that AISD was able to spot early on what the highest leverage investments would be to get our kids college and career ready ultimately. And that was, we offered full day pre-K before it was mandated by the state. And pre-K is one of the highest return on investment things, if not the highest thing you can do in education to get kids where you want them to be after they graduate from high school. And we did that before most people were doing that. And so for me, when I think about post-secondary readiness, it starts when the kids are babies. And even like working with our city council, we're even going beyond pre-K. We're going to like 0 to 3 and thinking about high quality childcare for our future AISD students. And so it really is this whole continuum. And the nice thing about, working with the littles is you're working with their families as well. And so we strongly believe that if you can get parents engaged, feeling comfortable with the school district, feeling like it belongs to them as well, regardless of their immigration status or language barriers or anything else, that they can be viewed as a strong partner in their kiddos' education. And that carries on. So we've got the pre-K, we need to make, but there's so many other components, right? You've got to make sure we have a highly qualified teacher in every classroom. You have to make sure that our middle school kiddos have, mental health supports and wraparound services, because we lose a lot of kids around middle school. High school, you want to make sure that our students understand all the careers that are available to them and that they have the support to really advance their academics at high levels. So it's this whole systemic approach that as a trustee, I'm really privileged to take part of.
Great. There's so much I could pick up and continue on all of that, Arati, but I'm going to try and focus on our topic at hand and pick up on one thing that you mentioned and then bring Jeff into the conversation as well. And that has to do with childcare. So it's not just an issue for those in thinking about preparing students when they're not pre-students, when they're very young and getting them ready. But also, I know, Jeff, you see and we see a number of adults who didn't advance to post-secondary ed right out of high school, have become parents, maybe single parents, and the biggest issue for them being able to go back is childcare. So I'm going to bring Jeff into the conversation and then swing back to you, Arati. And Jeff, can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and what you've been able to do to sort of help that population of single parents who are trying to pursue an education, either completing a degree that they started or just trying to start for the first time?
Yeah, that's a great point, especially when looking through the lens of an adult learner. Obviously, there's, we talk about why students or why people don't enroll or why don't they complete or pursue post-secondary education. You've got the high school direct to college enrollment that, we focus on, and like the ISDs, for example, seniors graduating, matriculating. But we also, in our area, we also work, like you said, with a lot of adult learners and some college no degree population. We call them comebackers, right? That's our terminology for them, stop outs, comebackers. But there's 3 barriers that we've seen for those types of potential students to pursue or think about or enroll in post-secondary education. 1 is finances, 2 is childcare, and 3 is the work-life balance and the ability to actually master the rigor of post-secondary education while also working a full-time job. And I think when you talk about childcare, one of the biggest barriers we see is working moms in our area not being able to pursue their dreams, their goals of becoming college graduates because they don't have adequate childcare, or they're in that middle income bracket that doesn't allow them to afford equitable and high quality childcare or giving their children to family members instead of taking them to childcare, right? And so one of the things we've been able to do in our area is partner with local childcare agencies and also the local workforce investment board in our area, Obviously, WIOA is part of the Texas landscape and Texas Workforce Commission. There's some dollars for child care services for each workforce development board area. So one of the things we've been able to do is create a really seamless pathway and a referral process between our navigators on the ground, the folks that are actually working with students directly, to start the re-enrollment process and connecting them directly to the child care services that are offered for income-dependent students. And so that's really been effective. I think if we can develop stronger referral processes into the Workforce Development Board and the child care services that they provide, then that begins to eliminate barriers. We've also created some of our local higher ed institutions, the community college, for example, our Del Mar College and Coastal Bend College here in the area, they've created child care centers, kind of a small version of a child care center at their local community college, where the students can actually bring their kids to the child care center for a very low cost while they're taking classes on campus. It's a very interesting and innovative idea, and it was kind of championed by our P16 work early on several years ago. So I think, Dr. Chromy, when you think about child care as a barrier, we have to be able to address it. I think number one, the seamless referral process into local agencies and really trying to find more financial options for low-cost childcare that's high quality will really begin to break down some of those barriers for adult learners.
Thanks, Jeff. And I just want to pick up on two points that you made just to highlight them. One is, this isn't a one organization effort. It is a collaborative effort and really regionalized because you've got to work within that regional area. And the second piece that you mentioned and what the community colleges are doing is allowing for drop off for a class and pick back up. Many child care services require you to sign up for a full day or for a month or for a week, which is not conducive to some single parents who just really want to drop their kids up, take a class and leave. So kudos to the local community colleges for creating that environment. I think that's really necessary. And then Arati, swinging back over to you on some additional thoughts you might have as you all are looking at the Austin School District area and how you're creating these programs. I'm really intrigued by the 0 to 3 piece, because I think it's absolutely right. Getting parents engaged and getting them to buy into this idea or this that everybody can go to college if they want to, if it's the right fit.
That's right. And I got to give a shout out to our Austin Community College. They've made similar investments in childcare for their students. And ACC has been such a good partner for AISD. That is the most common post-secondary institution that our graduates enroll in. So, and we're really fortunate as well because we get our students, we have dual credit, we've got, P-TECH and CTE programs that will allow our students to get certifications and degrees, even associate's degrees from Austin Community College by the time they graduate from high school. So just seeing our students and allowing our students to understand that there's a whole continuum, there's a whole ecosystem that is available to them, and getting that message to them really early is super helpful. And so that one day when they become parents, they'll know that they have, they feel good about where their own children are going to be going. I do, and speaking of parents, yesterday when I was prepping for this, I asked one of our experts on our staff, Dr. Creslin Fannin, about how we engage our own parents, AISD parents of students, into some of the work that we're doing. And I was like, do we offer them opportunities as well to get their certifications and re-enter the workforce? And in fact, I think tonight we're having a webinar that's open to parents so that they can also take advantage of these opportunities alongside their own students, which I think is really, really exciting. It does take all of us. It does take awesome partnerships like the ones that E2E offers in Corpus Christi. And we're really fortunate to have lots of partners here in Austin, including the United Way. We work with the Chamber of Commerce and many others as well.
And that's great. And it sort of pulls together our conversations about students and adults. And just want to follow up a little bit, dual credit programs are great, but not everybody is meant for college. It's just not where they fit in. And so certifications in various fields can really make a difference. And I'm assuming in the Austin ISD that independent school district, for those who are not familiar with our language, is making those certifications available while they're in high school that allows them to complete a program and be able to go into the workforce with something more than just a high school degree.
That's right. And so I think it's important to understand a little bit of context about Austin. So we are number 7 nationally in job growth. The top 5 industries for quality jobs, because that's what we want our kiddos to go to. We want them in quality jobs. According to a company called Jobs EQ, is healthcare, which has a $68K average salary, IT and technology, which has a $141K average annual salary on average, skilled trades, $78K average salary, manufacturing, $119K annual salary, and mobility and infrastructure, which is a $61K average salary. And one of the things that we've learned from our partners at E3 Alliance is, and this is really, if you have one takeaway from this, it's in the Austin area, if you do not get some sort of post-secondary credential, whether it's an industry certification or a degree, you only have a 12% chance of earning a living wage in Austin. And we believe strongly that our kids deserve more than a 12% chance. And so we, several years ago, we started partnering with local industry to develop pathways in technology, or PTech programs. And in our district, we offer career pathways in business management, computer technology, construction, cybersecurity, real estate. We're about to expand our advanced manufacturing, which is one of the fastest growing careers, with AI and all the stuff that's happening. We want to make sure our kids are prepared for that workforce. So we're really working hard to get a new program launched at Aikens High School. We have Infineon as a partner. So our kids are really going to be exposed to a lot. We also have students involved in a partnership with Tesla. However you feel about their CEO, we are really grateful to have students that are getting experiences, getting paid internships through Tesla, and getting their degrees paid for by Tesla, with the promises of high-paying jobs in that company once they get their credentials. So it really does take a lot of forethought and intentional partnership building, and really being clear in what the workforce data is and bringing it all together so that we are creating lasting and exciting opportunities for our students.
That's great. So you just pulled that thread all the way through and teed me up for my next question, which is the role of industry. And obviously you've hit it, the nail right on the head, Arati, with, the role of industry has to become even more important, whether it's paid internships or apprenticeships, or something that is, really getting to those folks who are maybe more technically, or in the construction trades. Gosh, we need so many people in the construction trades, especially given the infrastructure changes we're looking at doing in Austin alone, in the building that's going on here. Cybersecurity, healthcare, there's no place that doesn't need healthcare, all of that, which may or may not take a traditional route to a 4-year institution after college. And I think what I'm excited about, we had a gentleman here from Baylor Scott and White a couple of months ago talking about apprenticeships and how they're taking individuals from Del Valley ISD and bringing them right into that program. So excited about that. I'm going to turn it to Jeff and then back to you, Arati, to sort of talk about the role that you see and how your organization has been able to interact with industry, specifically focused on that group of adult learners, or what did you call them? Rebounders?
Comebackers.
Comebackers.
And I just want to take a step back and continue the thread that Arati was discussing, because, the reality is, and we all know this, the landscape of public education and higher education in the state of Texas is changing. We're focusing on credentials of value for the first time in the history of the state. All 3 agencies, Workforce Commission, Higher Education Coordinating Board, and TEA are all working together in a tri-agency work group. They're talking to each other. It's not perfect, but we're starting to see some of the fruits of that. the four-year degree, the four-year degree is becoming a bit devalued in the eyes of the consumer. It's not true. It is still very necessary and it's important, but more and more credentials of value and certifications and workforce training certificates are being brought to the forefront of the post-secondary education landscape. So when we say all that, now we look at how do the CTE programs at the school districts align not only with TEA requirements for programs of study, but how do they align with industry? How do they align with local workforce development board, labor market information for that particular area? Jobs in Austin are going to be different than high demand jobs in Corpus Christi or high demand jobs in Abilene or high demand jobs in Oklahoma or Tennessee or Missouri, right? So we're looking at each area of the state specifically and saying, what are the high demand jobs? And then let's backwards map it into CTE programming. And that's where industry comes in. That's what Arati was talking about and what Austin ISD is doing so well, what Corpus Christi ISD is doing well. What some of our rural districts struggle with is the idea of bringing industry to the table, not just to check off the box in a CTE advisory committee meeting, right? And to go through a list and agenda and say, okay, we had this many industry partners, but they didn't have a chance to say anything because all we did was talk to them about the cool things we're doing in our district. We see that a lot. And, industry needs to have a voice. Employers need to have a voice in the development of the programming that school districts and higher ed institutions are putting out. And I think we're seeing that in our area through the work of Upskill Coastal Bend and through the work of the Regional P16 Council. We're seeing industry have a voice at the table in design and implementation of programming, as opposed to districts saying, I designed this program, I designed this higher ed program or degree plan. Now industry come help us to sell it to people. That's not really the point of a credential of value. We're supposed to be aligning together, creating together, thought processing, thought partnering together. And it's easier said than done, right, Arati, especially in a school district. But are we bringing industry to the table to hear and listen to what they're saying about what that credential looks like for a student who is graduating with this certificate or with this degree? Are they really truly prepared for this high demand occupation? And I think that's where the gap is right now across the state. And it's not a new gap, it's an old gap, right? Bridging the gap between education and employment is literally what our organization does as a nonprofit organization. But that's an important landscape shift in the state of Texas right now, is that industry's got to have a voice at the table. So when you're thinking about adult learners, what we're trying to do is create more seamless pathways for work-based learning opportunities for adult learners, especially in the area of pre-apprenticeships and not registered apprenticeships. The state does a great job of registered apprenticeships and looking at the different types of occupations that are important across the state, but pre-apprenticeships and short-term internships and work-based learning opportunities, not only for high school students, but also for adult learners who are looking to explore a career pathway or reskill or upskill into a different career. We recently had a woman who was a retiree of a school district. She was an administrator, campus principal, lifelong educator. She decided she wanted to shift careers when she retired, and she wanted to get into IT. And so she didn't know whether she could do it. She didn't know whether she wanted to explore it. So we've got an IT pathway with an employer in our area who does networking and some coding and some computer specialist type work. So she got an internship. She took some classes at the community college. She got an internship for 8 weeks. She worked 8 weeks. They paid her. I think it was like $14 an hour just to work 30 hours a week. And she loved it. She continued, and now she graduated with an associate degree in computer science, and she's pursuing another workforce certification and CompTIA Plus and cybersecurity certification. That's an example of how the seamless pathway was created for that individual, saying, okay, if you want to explore this, don't just go pay a bunch of money, get a certificate, and try to figure it out. Let's do it concurrently. Let's get you into the education, post-secondary education, working towards a certificate, but also let's get some work-based learning opportunities for you, so that you can explore whether this is going to be a career. That's a valuable credential, because when she earns it, she knows she wants to be in this industry. And I think that's another gap that we need to do better at in general across the state, which is providing more opportunities to explore careers not only for high school, middle school students, but also for adult learners learning to upskill and reskill. The Trellis Foundation Upskilling and Reskilling Collaborative Grant that we were a part of really emphasized that idea of crosswalking pathways for adult learners and making a clear, articulated pathway for those who are exploring these types of career changes. And so I think those are two areas we can really work in. So to answer your question, Dr. Chromy, where's industry playing this? Industry is the pathway that we're leading up to when we're talking about post-secondary education. And if we're not developing that pathway concurrently, we're missing it and there's a gap in the middle.
I want to give Arati a chance because I'm sure there's so much to unpack under what you just
much.
said.
It's so good.
I know. I hope we did record this, so we have that bottle. But Arati, if there's anything more before I move on to the next question, which is somewhat pick up on something. But
I do. So Jeff, I really appreciated what you were talking about with exposing kids to different experiences, and you touched on like we've been talking a lot about big stuff like partnerships with industry, but I want to take a moment and shrink it back down to an individual child, right? Because all these numbers, they're students there, right? With lives and families and challenges and joys. And so one of the things that we really got to work on as a society is truly believing that every child can achieve at high levels. And if you don't have that belief, then none of this other stuff really matters, because you're always going to have the haves and the have-nots. And what we as a board changed, which I think was a significant way in how we assess ourselves and how we assess our superintendent, is we changed all of our scorecard metrics, which is the tool that our own accountability tool, to focus on economically disadvantaged students. Mm-hmm. So rather than looking at the aggregate, what percentage of students are reading in third grade, or what percentage of students are, going to college, we were what percentage of economically disadvantaged students? Because if you don't do that, then the other kids are going to bring up the average, and you're always going to have kids who are falling through the cracks. And so there's nowhere to hide now, right? And so, and the reason we did that is because it forces us then to look narrowly at the unique challenges for our students who historically have been underserved. And what we've learned, another thing I'm super proud of with AISD, is we've made a really intentional and deliberate investment in learning about trauma-informed instruction, because one of the things I've learned is trauma, pretty much more than any other factor, is what is correlated with students not achieving at high levels. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily poverty. It's the trauma that might come from poverty or racism or a parent being ill or a divorce or whatever it might be. But the nice thing about, if there's one good thing about trauma, it's that there are practices that teachers can actually do in their classrooms to undo some of the harms. So if you think about it, a child who is, coming from an abusive household, for example, when they come to school, they're on high alert. And there's cortisol coursing through their system. And when that's happening, it is very hard for them to actually learn and ingest information. And so we are training our teachers to learn how to work with students during instruction, and really allow students to relax and be ready to learn. And once you do that, that's when you can open them up to possibilities and some of the things Jeff was talking about with aspirations. Because when you're just trying to survive day to day, you're not thinking about what am I going to do when I graduate. You're just how am I going to survive this week? Or
this day, and right? Yes.
It really does take so much beyond what we typically think of post-secondary. And I appreciate that Jeff I don't know if you said it as explicitly, but I kind of imagine, you made me think of this, and I'm sure you're dealing with this every day as well. And I'm really understanding the home life that our kids are coming from, and viewing, it's about compassion, empathy. All of these things are also so critical to this conversation.
I read just a quick note. I read a study recently by one of the major staffing firms in the country. I won't name the staffing company, but they did a survey of employers and saying, how do they feel about the readiness and the ability to be ready to work of our high school graduating students across the country? And employers were 85% vote of no confidence. There's, in other words, only 15% of employers in the country feel like seniors that are graduating from high school are ready for work. And that makes sense. But the larger study was how the higher education system is preparing students with degrees, right? And that was 75% no confidence. So 25% of employers in our country feel that college graduates are not prepared for the world of work. What was so fascinating to me, Arati, which is what you're talking about in this idea of mental health and home life and the degradation of the essential values and skills that we all grew up with, that parents are just too busy to teach, generally speaking, to teach their kids at home right now. The soft skills are lacking. And that's an area that completely impacts the ability of students to work, the essential skills, things like being able to deal with mental health and the trauma, being able to deal with confidence issues, and being able to have leadership skills and communication and critical thinking. That's all part of this. And I wonder if we could do a better job in general in incorporating some of that soft skills development and training into the classroom, right? You know, as a school board president, you know, that's an essential part of preparing students for the world of work. So how do we do that a little bit better? And I think that's another area that we can have another discussion about another day.
Love it.
We definitely could, because my mind went to, we're now asking teachers to also be social workers, and we're asking so much of them, yet we don't pay them enough money to actually even live in Austin, right? Arati, so that's another whole
So we digress. Back to you, Dr. Chromy.
Yeah, which is great. But I just picking up on some of this to try and get us back on track a little bit, although I would love to have this conversation. And that is around, to your point, one of you made, is there is a population of students, I think you made this, Arati, who will go through high school, will go into a 4-year program and will be fine. But there's a whole group that is questioning, I think, Jeff, you brought this up, the value of post-secondary education. And I'm wondering if we're looking at this wrong, because post-secondary ed has really become, or needs to become, nonlinear. And we need to accept that some people will get a credential in high school or get a credential after high school, go into a job, return, whether their employer is paying for it or they choose to go back and get another certificate or get an associate's degree and move up. But instead of, thinking of this as a standard high school, 4 years, maybe you work, then you go get a master's or something like that, thinking about it more as a lifelong journey. And I know, Jeff, this is something that you're passionate about, but I think we need to start thinking about post-secondary education as being nonlinear, and it will go back and forth between work and education. Just want to get your thoughts on that, Jeff, and then Arati.
Yeah, absolutely. I have said it earlier, not only the perception of post-secondary education is changing in the eyes of the consumer, but also the definition of post-secondary education has changed. We came up with, we grew up with the idea of post-secondary education being college, end of story, maybe military, right? But that wasn't really considered education. Now there's a much more broader definition of the word post-secondary education. And I think we, as we see the landscape shift in the messaging, the idea of credentials of value, of workforce training, of short-term certifications, even continuing education credentials, I think we need to do a better job in our space. Just in general, we as an organization in the Coastal Bend, but we as educators and partners who are working alongside public education and higher education, we need to do a better job of continuing to emphasize the fact that post-secondary education of some sort is needed for a living wage. The misconception is that, well, I don't have to go to college to get a good job. That's true. But that doesn't mean you can't just get a high school diploma and not do any type of post-secondary work. There are some outliers where you can get a good job with a high school diploma and make a good wage, but the majority of jobs in the country, in Texas and the Coastal Bend region, require some form of post-secondary education. And we need to message that. We need to continue to message that to students. I can't tell you how many students I talk to here in our area that say, no, mister, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to graduate from high school and I'm going to go work at a refinery. But the refinery is telling us, they can't get in the door without some sort of post-secondary education. They've got to have some sort of 2-year or credential or certificate of something to get in the door. So that's a misconception that has to be squashed. But I think when we talk about this idea of post-secondary education, finances is a big deal. The cost of post-secondary education is rising. I think that dual credit, House Bill 8 is going to help with that, but not all students are going to be able to do dual credit in high school. Not all students are going to be able to complete dual credit. So CTE programs of study are important. I think, I take my one of my middle student, for example. He wanted to get into a program when he was starting this year as a sophomore, but he couldn't get into the CTE program because he didn't start it as a freshman. And it's just the way it is for that particular program. And so that's a barrier. How can we as school districts overcome that and allow students choices to get exposure to these types of skilled trades and pathway programs without having to go through the X, Y's, and Z's, understanding TEA has a requirement for programs of study, but can we be more flexible with that? There's so many ways that we can do it. And I think we're starting to see the shift with the tri-agency working together. But in general, I think for me, the most important message I can give to answer your question, Dr. Chromy, is we have to continue to message that, yes, the 4-year degree isn't as critical as it was in the past, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't pursue it. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't stack credentials on your journey to it. And we have to message that and just say that, lifelong learning and pursuit of higher education should be the goal for every student and every resident and every learner, every adult and individual in our area. That's my message to answer your question.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add on, from a technology perspective, if we go back even, 30 or 40 years, maybe not even that long ago, you could go right out of high school and work at a refinery. You could go out of high school and work at an auto company. Everything is computerized now, and we're only moving more and more that way. So you've got to have something beyond. And I'll go back to Arati's 12%. And if only 12% are actually going to earn a living wage, a truly living wage, then you have to add something on. And I think you could add that 12% back into your pitch, Jeff, and say, do you want to be part of the 12% or you want to be part of the 88%, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And then Peter put a good question, good comment in the chat that the idea of transferable skills and hybrid skills and getting more creative with the way we're training our folks into these jobs. There's so many innovative ways we can do these types of things, but it takes a village, right? It's not just one institution, one organization. It really is like a regional, it's a shift in the ecosystem in the landscape of an area, of a city, of a county, of a region. And that's hard to shift. It's like the adage of the big ship turning the rudder. It's going to take a while to turn that ship, right? And so that's what we're trying to do here in our region.
Yeah, and I think this is a big pivot point for us, with everybody saying we don't think post-secondary education is worth it, or if there's only a 10% differential from industry in terms of the value of somebody who comes out, it only underscores, is that the right path for me, as opposed to a program that is actually teaching me skills, whether they are the durable or essential skills, or they are particular technical skills or others. Liberal arts major here, I will admit to that, economics major. So, I'm not saying that isn't important. I still believe in that. I think you have to be able to think critically and do a lot more than just have the technical piece of it. But that can happen over time. It doesn't have to happen right out of high school.
And how can we get employers to recognize the value of incumbent workers gaining more education? And that's another. So I can't tell you how many adult learners we talk to and say, well, I'm not going to get any money or any pay raise if I get a better degree because I've been here for 10 years and I can get a promotion, but I'm not going to get any more money. And so what's the value of it? What's the opportunity cost for that person? What's the ROI for that individual? But if employers are saying, hey, we're going to continue to invest in you, if you invest in your education, that's a landscape changer. Really that's encouraging and motivating for adult learners, especially.
Yeah. And that's what I like about the Tesla program Arati mentioned. They're paying you and they're paying you to go to school and they're paying the tuition for a job. Sorry, Arati, let's bring you into the conversation here. You've been very patient.
Oh no, I'm learning, and Jeff, I appreciated your mentioning the stackable certifications. That's really key in this. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about like our experience in AISD. So we offer a lot of wonderful programs. Unfortunately, the numbers of students who are taking advantage of them is lower than you might expect. And so this is really an area of focus, and we're trying to figure out like, why is this? And what we've learned is part of it is, there is a barrier. It's the TSI test, which is, an academic test that students have to take in order to be able to advance in their industry certification or their degree programs while they're in high school. And in the past, our students have had, we started the conversation with students about the TSI and preparing them for that right before they started high school, around ninth grade. And we realized, as Jeff kind of alluded to, that might be too late, because some of the programs start at ninth grade, the coursework starts at ninth grade. So they need to come into high school already having passed that test. So some of this is structural, and we're really fortunate that we have staff who have isolated that issue and are making changes. And so we are now going to be offering and exposing our students to the TSI test while they're in middle school, and making sure that kids know about this so that as soon as they hit high school, they're ready to roll and they can get into programs and start their course of study. And so that's one area. And I do expect we're going to see an increase in student attainment on this because of this one simple change, right? The other thing is that I've just heard anecdotally is the schedule. Think about it. If you're a high school student and you're on an athletics team in AISD, that's a double blocked class during the school day. And so there might not, but then you've also got all of your required courses as well. And so there might not be room in your schedule to do a CTE or a PTEC pathway. And that's really a shame, because you might have a kid who wants to do it. And if you ask a high school kid, hey, would you rather be on a football team or in cybersecurity, most of them are going to say football team, please. That's way cooler. But we've got to figure out maybe how we can accommodate our schedules to open up, to not hold any opportunities, to keep any kids from pursuing these opportunities. So we can't let our own systems and structures get in the way. And it does require a critical look. And it requires something else that's come up a lot in our superintendent conversations as we're doing a superintendent search, is creating an environment in the school district that allows staff to be reflective, to be critical, so that they feel safe, bringing new ideas to the table. If you don't have that, then you're not really taking advantage. You're not really harnessing the power of the thousands of employees you have. If everyone's just there doing their marching orders, there's not going to be any risk taking. And to do this kind of work, as you've heard Jeff talk about, it takes a little bit of risk. You've got to get outside of your comfort zone and create new things. So that requires a culture that values innovation and change and speaking up.
I couldn't agree more. And Arati, you made me think of one more job that teachers do or should do, which is understanding how geometry or calculus applies to a job. If you were to ask, I'm guessing, any high school student about advanced manufacturing, they would have no clue what that meant. What do those jobs look like? Yeah. What would I be doing? No clue. So there's also the piece of being able to help students to understand what they're good at, what they enjoy, and how that connects to potential jobs or careers that are out there, so that they can see that piece and how it connects. People know cybersecurity, they know what that means, but I don't know if they know what's involved in the chip. Samsung's plant. I'm assuming, they're going to need tons of people to work in the chip plant, right? What are we doing? I'm sure there's work going on at the community colleges. I can pretty much guarantee Austin Community College is all over it. But what are we doing then at the high school level as well to ensure that people need, or adults saying, let's think, Jeff, of somebody who's got some college but no credential, and if you were able to take a look and say, you are 2 courses away from having a certification or a degree or something that actually allows you to be eligible for this job over here, which, by the way, is going to double your annual salary and put you on a path for growth. Like, those are the types of things we need to be talking about.
I was just going to mention two things. This is another discussion for another day, Dr. Chromy, but the idea of reverse transfers and credit for prior learning are such key. They're so key to the adult learner populations. But as a nonprofit organization or as a community partner or agent, we've got no control over that. That's an institutional decision, and each institute, and not even the coordinating board, can mandate that all higher ed institutions do this for CPL or do this for reverse transferring. But those are two areas, especially in adult learners, that we really need to get a better handle of. Or I wish our institutions would do a better job of getting innovative and thinking outside the box in those two areas.
Yeah. And Arati, I'm assuming you agree with that as well.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So I'm looking at time, and sorry, I didn't get through. Sorry, I just built off of your conversations and never got to our planned questions. But I do want to ask the last one, which is, if you could wave a magic wand and change policy to provide more support for those who want to pursue post-secondary education, or to help them to understand the value of post-secondary education and what it means for them, their family, their communities, what would you change? And you can speak both to institutional, state, or federal policy. You want to start, Arati?
Sure. And some people are going to get mad at me for saying this. But I really do think we need to fully fund public education. Like, I'm not just like, people often say you can't just throw money at the problem. And I'm not talking about throwing money. I'm talking about like ensuring that our teachers can afford to live in the cities where they are teaching. You remember, like when I was growing up, my teachers lived in my neighborhoods, like it was like you would see them at the grocery store and all that stuff, it's part of what we need to get our kids achieving at high levels and, pursuing post-secondary education. And we're having a really tough time, and a lot of school districts, probably most of them, adopted deficit budgets last year because the state has refused to invest more in public education. We rank nearly last in per pupil funding in the country. We are, I think, number 43 or 44 out of 50 states. The average basic allotment in Texas is $6,100, and the national average is $10,000 per student. Special education is underfunded. We're 12% of our students are receiving SPED services. So I really do think that we have the knowledge. We know, like we've got UT right here. We have the research. We've got people like Angela Valenzuela, who's on this call, Terrence Green, and other people who know what works. We don't have the money to do it, and we're having to just try to get by. And public education is the cornerstone, I think, of a healthy society. And so I will say the policy change would be to put more money into public education so that we can hire the staff that will be able to serve our students in all the ways they need to be served. And so that's my number one. And I think number two, I would say is, and it's not necessarily a policy thing, but I just want to mention valuing families. We tend to think about like we're forgetting about a whole group of people that can be equal partners and be as or more impactful on a student's education than teachers. And so if we can really think about how to get our parents in and feeling comfortable in our schools and telling them about post-secondary early on, they can prepare then financially and mentally for their kid to go off into the world.
Great. Thank you, Arati. Jeff?
Oh, goodness. How much time do we have left?
Well, we got to leave some time for Q&A.
Okay, so let me. So there's really two that I think of big picture. The first one that I think of is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act, the what we call WIOA. That's for me, in the space that we work, WIOA through the local workforce development boards is able to fund training dollars to allow underserved and low-income individuals that have barriers to employment and education, able to fund their training, able to fund their degree, if you will. But the eligibility requirements for WIOA are very stringent. There's some local board flexibility, but the percent to poverty in terms of an income determination is leaving out a whole group of people who are in a middle income bracket who can't afford childcare, who can't afford higher education costs, who have to work for a living, but they don't make enough money to be able to add on the financial burden of pursuing a post-secondary education or a post-secondary degree. I think if we raise that percent to poverty or lower it, depending on your perspective, and made more people eligible to receive those services, we'd see a greater influx in demand in post-secondary education. Removing that barrier, if you will. So especially in the 18 to 24-year-old population, WIOA youth funds, those 18 to 24-year-olds we call opportunity youth or disconnected youth, or those who are at risk of disconnection. If we can figure out a way to get more of them invested into training, then I think that's a win-win for everybody. So number one policy, magic wand wave would be to change the eligibility or loosen the eligibility requirements for WIOA, specifically in the 18 to 24-year-old population, but also for adults and adult learners as well. And I think also just kind of thinking about the work-based learning and programs of study at the ISDs. I would like to see I'd like to see TEA do something different with work-based learning opportunities and incentivizing districts to create more pathways. And they're doing it already. Arati, you mentioned a couple of examples, but if we can get TEA to kind of loosen that and incentivize districts to create employer partnerships, not just committees to check it off the box, but actually continuing to do some of that work and incentivizing districts to do it, that would be great. And I have to say the number one for me is the rural area, equitable access to post-secondary educational opportunities in the rural area. I think a lot of our policies in Austin, not Austin ISD, but Austin, like our legislature in Texas, they're built around urban districts and the focus on urban districts where the majority of the resources are. You were talking about football versus CTE programs in Austin ISD. The rural area, you've got kids doing multiple sports. They don't have the opportunity to do that, lack of resources. So I'd like to see the tri-agency group launch some sort of rural task force to speak, to lend a voice to legislation for the rural kids. And they did that recently with RPEP, with the Rural Post-Secondary Excellence Pathways, but that's just one example. So those are the three that I would think of if I had a magic wand.
Right. Thank you both very much. I think, Andrea, you've been taking questions, so I'm going to turn it over to you to formulate the questions for our two panelists.
Yes. So our first question is, how do organizations capture and use employment and wage outcomes of post-secondary completers they support to both help communicate the value and for continuous improvement purposes?
I'll take that one. I think that the tri-agency group in Texas is working on creating a data stream between public education, higher education, and the labor record or the wage record. It's not there yet, but I was able to see a preview of what they're doing behind the scenes to try to create this data stream, and it's coming. So I think that for now, it's a hard thing to do to track someone at the student identifier level from high school to college completion into the labor force. We can do it if you've got good partners and data sharing agreements, but you've got to involve three different entities. The tri-agency group is trying to streamline that and make it accessible at the student identifier level. And I think that's coming, but it's still in progress. There's a lot of legal and FERPA and PII requirements around that.
Yeah, and I know that is a priority for Commissioner Keller at the coordinating board. Yeah. And the challenge is the wage record. And tracking that person through the second and fourth quarter wages, because the wage record is not identified down to the Social Security number. It's identified in a different way. So TWC and the coordinating board are trying to figure that out right now. Thank you.
And I would say for the district, we're similar issues. I will say the best we can do right now is tracking our students in their post-secondary attainment, because our Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board tracks that. My understanding is they only track it for Texas public institutions. So we also partner with the National Student Clearinghouse to get all the real data. And I want to point out one thing that I always try to make sure people understand is for AISD, you remember earlier I talked about how we focus on economically disadvantaged students and really tracking that closely. And one of the things that we're tracking is the percentage of economically disadvantaged students who actually do either directly enroll into college right after high school, or attain an industry certification or an associate's degree while they're in high school. Okay, those are three really critical CCM college and career indicators. AISD is achieving, our economically disadvantaged students are achieving that at a rate that's about almost three times higher than the state. Which is we're really glad to see that. It's still not high enough. It's still only 25% of our EcoDis students are achieving that, but the state level it's 9%. And so clearly there's a lot of work to be done. And just the only thing I would add to what Jeff is saying is, like, when we're looking at this data, make sure you're disaggregating it, because that's going to tell you a very different story from if you look at overall. Because overall, the numbers look really, really good. It's only until you disaggregate it that you can pinpoint where the issues are.
And Arati, can you track that increase back to specifically this focus on economically disadvantaged students?
I think so, yeah, because what happens is when the board is saying, hey, superintendent, we're holding you accountable for outcomes for economically disadvantaged students, what the administration then is forced to do, and they want to do it too, they're aligned with us, it forces them, though, to put more resources into our Title I schools. Maybe we need to have smaller class sizes, or maybe we need to have more instructional coaches, or, this or that or the other. And so that is how equity happens in a school district. Is it takes the board, I feel, who's representing the community, to put a vision out there and put very clear expectations out there, and then the whole system follows.
Yeah, it's a great metric. Yes.
Yeah, we see that in the CCMR outcome bonuses, like you're talking about, RT, but the thresholds are different for economically disadvantaged versus non-EcoDis students. And so there's a greater threshold for or greater need to invest into those EcoDis students. But we're seeing that in our region as well. And I have to attribute it to advising. We're doing a lot of college and career advising across the region. I saw another question that's going to come up, and we can talk about it in a little bit. But those are effective practices. But it takes a board saying, hey, deploy these resources, invest these resources into it. And we're seeing that as well.
But I do agree, what gets tracked or what gets measured is what gets done. So accountability is a big, a big way to achieve this.
Absolutely.
Jeff touched on this, but I just wanted to fully read the question and see if Arati had anything to contribute, or Jeff, if you had more thoughts. Today, we are seeing a profound evolution that increasingly requires skills from various domains that are combined. This is impacting the fundamental nature of occupations and makes navigating this shift in skills challenging. How can we look at developing more hybrid skills, for example, data analysis and a specific industry skill?
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Arati. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I love that question. And it gets to the heart of kind of what you just said, Debra. What gets measured gets done, because our state accountability is based on test scores, the STAR test to be exact. And there's a limit to how effective that is in assessing students' sort of interdisciplinary skills. It's not set up that way. It's set up to look at a certain skill set in a certain domain, and that's it. And so it is really incumbent on administrations and school boards to show their value of project-based learning and other things, culturally inclusive learning, and allowing students to really take what they've learned and apply it in new ways. And here's the other equity piece is oftentimes you'll see this in a school district where the kids who are the Black and brown kids, I'm just going to say it, they end up getting a very structured curriculum that's skill-based. And then everyone else, the more privileged kids, get to do the more exciting things.
Yes,
and
yes.
You've got to call it out. You've got to name that. And then you have to really encourage that exciting interdisciplinary learning across the district, because that's, I think, when kids really do start seeing the role that they can play in society when they get older, is if you've got to have them practice that in the classroom. And if you're just training kids to be little test takers, and just, do all this stuff, they're never gonna, it's going to be really hard for them to succeed. That's my unfiltered opinion.
And, across ISD and adult learners, the landscape is the same. Like what Peter said in that comment, what are we doing strategically to look at industries that are in high demand, and then taking those industries and instead of looking at individual occupations, look at the industry as a whole and say, what are the transferable skills across this entire industry? Now, regardless of occupation, is data analysis a transferable skill across all these occupations? Is customer service? Is Microsoft Office certification? Is QuickBooks? What are these transferable skills, whether they're technical or non-technical? And how can we look at the industries and say, let's teach not just the technical certification, but let's get this skill involved and incorporated into the curriculum and design. If we do that, like Peter said, then our workforce is going to be better prepared to move across occupations within the same industry. And that's a game changer for, the state of Texas and the workforce development initiatives across the state.
So it's almost making it another layer. So you have English proficiency, you have math proficiency, you have science proficiency, and you have transferable skills or essential skills proficiency. So it's moving that up to that level. Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Another question for you all. How do you see the endorsement pathways furthering students' college readiness and or college and career options?
For us, we do a couple of large conferences every year where we call them college and career conferences. Discover Your Direction for 7th through 10th graders and Ready for College and Career for juniors and seniors. And those conferences are focused on bringing students in from the region and giving them exposure to employers, to pathways, to educational opportunities and occupations in the Coastal Bend. All of that is designed around the foundation, around those pathways. It's, our liberal arts and humanities, it's business and industry, it's STEM, it's healthcare, public service. And so I think, my opinion, and this is, again, putting on my dad hat and thinking about I know a lot about this, and my boy still had a hard time figuring it out because someone in 9th grade and 8th grade brought him a sheet of paper in their middle school and said, here, pick one of these and give it to me by the end of class.
Yeah.
An 8th grader doesn't know what to pick. He hasn't explored yet. And so my son, for example, selected public service because his uncle is a police officer. But he's got no interest in becoming a police officer. But that's carried him through, and I had to make some changes in 9th grade. I think as like an ISD, especially like in Austin ISD, you've got Arati on the line, CCISD, some of the rural areas. Let's do more career exploration in middle school. In 6th grade and 7th grade, let's expose kids. Let's use the pathways and the foundations and the endorsements to kind of set the tone for these areas that students want to be involved in. Because if we don't do any exploration with middle schoolers and we don't give them exposure in any way to any of these endorsements, and then we put a piece of paper in front of them that they have to take home or they've got to sign in class, we're not doing them a service, and we're not really giving them the opportunity. Like you said, Arati, the system and the process has to become a little bit more flexible, and we've got to do some backwards mapping to get that exposure into the middle school, I think, and maybe even into the late elementary, 5th or 6th grade. Anyway, that's my thought on the endorsements. We use the endorsements for college and career exploration here in our area.
I really appreciate that. And it made me think about, the need for college counselors, because otherwise someone's got to create that sheet, right? That the kid takes home, and really like make sure that we have all of these opportunities set up for our students. And we're really fortunate in Austin to have community members who are very interested in this. At the same time, I think the average counselor to student ratio is like one counselor for 350 students. Okay, just let that sit for a minute. That's not enough. I've got 2 kids and I can barely handle that. So I can't imagine having 350 where you've got to really help them understand where they are academically and, in every other way. And that's why when you asked me about the magic wand, the increased, if we fully funded public education, we could reduce that ratio to like one counselor to every 100 kids, and really dig deep and provide our students like that case management almost approach. We have communities and schools. We're really fortunate to have that, but like there's a limit to what you can do. And I think we've got to really think big. Our kids are coming, they are really just worth that investment so they can take advantage of these endorsements. But it really takes more than what we've got.
Well, and that reminds me of a program that used to have federal funding, and it was through the states, but it was money to fund near peer counselors. So somebody from your community, somebody from Corpus Christi or Austin that went on and got a degree would come back and be a counselor and say, I sat in your seat, and this is what it meant to me. And I wish that funding hadn't gone away because that was a federal source of funding. And I really think sometimes, they might listen to an adult or a teacher or a parent, but there's nothing more impactful than talking to somebody who is close to your age, has lived what you have lived, and has gone on and done well. So if I had a magic wand, I would bring that program back.
Well, that goes right to another question we have. Can the panelists talk about the advising structures they have at their schools in order to support this excellent pathways work?
We're a nonprofit organization, so we don't work necessarily inside the school district traditionally, but we've expanded over the last 3 years with a partnership with a philanthropic organization called Rooted Alliance. And Rooted is all about increasing post-secondary enrollment outcomes for rural students in America. They work in a couple of different states. We're fortunate enough to be a regional partner in Texas, along with Workforce Solutions, West Texas, and with Kilgore College, and also with Education Service Center Region 1 now. So E2E is a regional partner. Rooted funds a bunch of advisors in high schools across the region, and we program manage those advisors. And the goal of those advisors is to work with juniors and seniors on post-secondary enrollment, leading to direct-to-college enrollment in August and TSIA readiness, all around increasing outcome bonus funding for the districts. It has made a huge difference in our area. Our area, if you look at the state landscape, Texas Impact Network and Commit Partnership just put out a report about the increase in post-secondary direct-to-college enrollment in the state of Texas, and our area is up like 10%. 9%. And it's, I think we're number 2 in the state. I attribute that not just to E2E, our institutions are doing a great job, but it's the the college and career advising in the high schools, case management style, regular one-on-one meetings, assistance with FAFSA, college applications, exploration, campus tours, visits to post-secondary education. There's a lot of organizations in the state that are doing this type of work. I wish that, as Arati said, I wish that we could wave a magic wand and fund that in all of our schools in Texas. Because what happens is the larger urban schools, like in Austin ISD, have college and career counselors, right? And then you've got academic counselors, but the rural schools don't. The rural schools have one counselor who does A through M, another one who does N through Z, and they can't do that college and career advising. And it makes a difference in the lives of students and families. And it's holistic because our advisors are working with the students, and now their parents are we're engaging parents, and we're getting them back into school, asking them about coming back to getting their degree or certification. And it's a holistic approach to advising that I think is working very well, but it costs money and it's resources and capital. And we're very grateful to Rooted Alliance for funding that here in our area. So that's our experience with college and career advising in the Coastal Bend.
And I think, to circle back, I think the question was also included like the partnerships. How do we know what to focus on? How do we build these relationships? We have several ways in the districts. We've got like as CTE advisory committees. We also have a nonprofit called API, Austin Partners in Education, which allows for industry and the school district to work together and actually provide mentors and career advice to students. We have a seat on the education advice. I think it's the education committee at the Chamber of Commerce. And Austin, it's a big city, but it's also a small town. And so like a lot of it is just personal connections. Even our Central Texas School Board Association has a meeting coming up where all the Central Texas School Board trustees are bringing in their Chamber of Commerce people to have a more regional conversation. So it's some of it's organic, some of it's kind of just unplanned conversations. But as long as folks are prioritizing this conversation, that's usually how things that I've seen happen. It's like, hey, what have you been to this school? Have you seen this? Let me tell you about what's happening. And I think it takes a lot of trust too to build this. And so that's what we try to focus on in the district.
Thank you. We have one more question. There is some interesting research out of Harvard's project on workforce related to career navigation in a time of rapid change. How do we strengthen career navigation to ensure there's more equitable career navigation systems?
That's a loaded question. Was that Peter again?
Yeah.
Peter, great question. It's all about resources and training. It's all about connecting the dots, especially in the rural areas of our region where we've got a navigator working on behalf of a county, working with residents, connecting the dots between partners, institutions, wraparound services, being the expert. When we talk about navigation, we're helping individuals navigate the landscape and the red tape of and re-enrollment into post-secondary education. I can't tell you how many adult learners especially, and I know this applies to high school students as well, give up and say it's not worth it. I don't want to go stand in another line or talk to another person who's going to send me to another department. Strengthening navigation is all about giving someone personalized, individualized assistance and walking them through the process. And to do that, we have to be subject matter experts. We've got to have great relationship with stakeholders and partners. We got to become a trusted part of the community that we're working in. And I think that that's the key to navigation. There's a lot of data that needs to be involved, a lot of qualitative and quantitative studies that we can read. But at the end of the day, it's an individual helping another individual navigate the landscape of re-enrolling into post-secondary education. And I think that's what navigation is all about. So we strengthen that by developing relationships and building trust in the community. That's our take on it. And it seems to be working okay in our area.
I could jump on that. I think you've hit on something. You can build all the websites you want in the world, but it really does come down for a particular population of people, one-on-one counseling and understanding, because they can't navigate that. And one of the things that we do at Trellis is working with institutions on enrollment issues. And what we find is the funnel is big. And so what is it that happens as it goes down to here? And you lose so many people out of that process. And I think some of it is, Jeff, I'm out. Like this is too many hoops to jump through or too difficult, or I don't know how to answer this question. Or so they're just like, I'm out. So it is, I think, thinking about from a navigation perspective, I do think it requires some one-on-one support, but I also think it means looking at our processes and systems that were probably built for institutions and re-looking at them based on the student or the prospective student and making it easy for them to move through that process. Not eliminating anything, but just building it from their perspective as opposed to our perspective.
Absolutely. I'll just add that navigation is not just the navigator and the individual like you, but it's navigating the system and changing the ecosystem of the seamlessness of the pathway for a learner, from a learner's perspective. So that article that Peter referenced, it also talks about the idea of this navigation of the ecosystem and changing and disrupting segregated entry points and barriers to entry for adult learners and for students. So I just wanted to add that we're not just talking about an individual. It's true, that's part of navigation, but it's also this ecosystem and how do we navigate that ecosystem as well.
Arati?
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind. One is in terms of just like basic career navigation. So like we have software that every high school kid has access to where they can go through and take a little quiz and it spits out, okay, these are career possibilities for you. And it's actually not a terrible way to just like start for some of our students. So I think there's like that option. And I think as artificial intelligence becomes more and more sophisticated, that there might be a role there, but there's no substitute for human. And one thing I want to point out is, when we're talking about first gen college students, they don't often have the social capital to really understand like what they've got to do, right? Like it is even the FAFSA now at AISD, we have a 75% FAFSA completion rate, which is pretty good. But it's like, it takes a lot to get to that, right? And if you're a kid and you don't have any family members who have been through this process, you don't know where to turn. And so it is up to the school district and all these partners to step in and understand, like there is a relationship that needs to be built, and parents have to trust the school district that they're telling their kid, like they're giving their kid good advice. And, before I became a trustee, in my work, I was a program evaluator for Gear Up in Waco and for Gear Up, Texas. And one of the things I noticed in talking to parents was some parents felt like they had to make a choice for their kid between family or college. And we've got to figure out a way to show like it's not really that kind of a choice. It's not so black and white. And so you can do both. Or if a kid goes away to college, they'll always come back, And so we've got to let our parents in on this so they don't view education as a threat to a family's culture. And that is kind of, I don't know enough about it to really, I'm sure there's a bunch of research on this, but I think there's something to it, and we've got to tap into that a little bit more and see really what are the psychological barriers to some of this, so that our kids can take advantage of all these opportunities.
Exactly. And I'll close with just a personal comment. And this is years ago, but I came from a single family home, mom, 4 of us. My mom worked 3 jobs, definitely came first gen, all of that. When I applied to and got accepted to go to school, and it was an Ivy League school, well, 7 sister school, my mother didn't speak to me for the first semester because she thought I was throwing my money away. I had a perfectly good job as a secretary, and what was I doing? And it wasn't until she came to graduation and she looked around and she said, I didn't understand. Like I didn't understand any of that. So sometimes it is, you're right about the whole, first gen, they just don't know what all that means and what it could mean. And does your child then leave the rural area and never come back? It's all of those things. So I want to thank you. I know we have a hard stop for our panelists, and so they have another, I know Jeff has a commitment at 10:30. But I do want to thank you both very much for sharing examples of what you're doing. This problem that we need to solve is huge, and nobody can boil the ocean, but you two have provided examples of what is in your control and in your power, and that you're able to do at a very regional level, and really demonstrated how one person can really make a difference working collaboratively with others who have the same passion. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Arati, for being here, but more importantly, for the work that you do every single day. Really appreciate that. Again, thank you all for joining us. And again, big thanks to both Jeff and Arati. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for
Have a
having
great
us.
day.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Thanks, Deborah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andrea.